Welcome to The Future Unleashed from Lincoln College, Oxford. I'm your host, Helen O'Hara, and joining me today is Chilean social entrepreneur Rodrigo Jordan. Rodrigo is one of Latin America's most accomplished mountaineers. He's led several expeditions, including Everest in 92 and 2004 and K2 in 1996. He climbed Everest again in 2016, making him one of only 3 mountaineers in the world to have climbed that mountain by its 3 faces. He's authored a number of books and documentaries based on those expeditions. But Rodrigo is also founder and president of Vertical in Chile, a non-profit organisation that offers outdoors education programmes aimed at teaching leadership and teamwork skills to adults and children alike. He was knighted by Chile's Ministry of Education with the Gabriela Mistral Educational and Cultural Merit Order and was distinguished with the Gilbert M. Grosvenor Medal by the University of Texas Center for Geographical Education. So, Rodrigo, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, Helen. Thank you very much.
Oh, we're delighted to have you. So tell us, how did you get into mountaineering? Is this something that started at university, or were you already a mountaineer before that?
Well, it all started with a geography book I was giving when I was 7 or 8. And there was a photograph on that, nothing to do with mountaineering, but it was a photograph of Tenzing Norgay on the summit of Everest on that very first ascent that the British made. Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. And I said to myself, I want to do this. Don't ask me why, but, it's something in your guts that you're going to do it. So I started climbing as a kid and went into the mountains. We're here in Santiago, right, at the foot of the Andes, so the mountains are in our backyard. So you can go and out. And I went out, made a lot of mistakes, so happily didn't have any accident. But finally, I went into the university and joined the club and joined the courses. We had the problems, as you did with Argentina, border problems. And so within the military dictatorship, they asked the universities to develop what they called strategic sports. And I had an instructor which became a real mentor. His name is Claudio Lucero. He's now 92 years of age. He taught us everything about mountaineering. And he was an incredible mountaineer, but also an incredible teacher. I was extremely lucky that he ended up in our university. And I spent maybe 2 or 3 years being a student of his and working with him. But then when I got out, I kept on climbing, and we climbed together for maybe 15 years. So we shared a tent and everything. And so he taught me much more about life, about values, about romanticism, more than actually mountaineering. He did, of course, they taught me all our skills, but that was a very important part of my life, working with Claudio.
And, there's a very strong tradition, of course, of climbing and mountaineering here in the UK. Did that influence your decision then to come to Oxford?
Well, to be very honest, I started climbing and I, got pretty serious about it. I started reading mountaineering books, and I can't remember somebody of my family gave me a book of Chris Bonington, his biography, and I just started reading. And my mountaineering instructor in Chile said the British climbers were the very best climbers in the world. So that was a main reason to go to Oxford. I was applying myself to become a professor or lecturer at the university here in Chile, and so they demanded that I should do some kind of postgraduate studies, a doctorate or something. So I applied to Oxford for both things, for the content, right, and also for the mountaineering.
Right. Bit of combining,
yeah.
2 ambitions at once.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to talk a bit more about that, but we should get into the meaning of social entrepreneurship, because I feel like it's one of those phrases people hear, but they haven't necessarily got a clear definition of in their head. So how do you use that? What do you mean by that phrase?
Well, if you have a line, you can think of 2 poles, one at the right, one at the left. And so at the right-hand side, you have full entrepreneurship, business people that, for-profit organizations. And on the other side, you have charities and foundations that would help, as I say, maybe, poor families or poor sectors or poor neighborhoods. Well, that line, it's a continuum. It's not these 2 blocks. There's in between several kind of organizations. There is businesses that their profits go out to social issues. And so they work like a business, they do sales, they do marketing, they do everything, but all of their sales go into some kind of social issue, health, gender equality, environment, poverty. And so that's a manifestation of what we would call social entrepreneurship. And on the other hand, you might start, like a business, a foundation. And so, for example, Patagonia is a brand that markets and sells clothing and everything. But all of their profits go to environmental issues. They are now owned by a foundation, not by a family, not by investors, or shareholders. And so there is a wide range of, in between these two poles, of kinds of organizations that work maybe with business models or with social models, but they work in the kind of business world to provide solutions for approaching poverty. So you might say, at the same time, that social entrepreneurship have existed for centuries. Oxfam, it was started like a charity, but they work like formal organizations, so you might think of those as social entrepreneurship.
So your study at Oxford also laid the foundations for a lot of the work you do now in social entrepreneurship. So can you explain how that came about?
Well, on my academic work and research work, we were trying to help with in those years, the energy crisis. We were trying to develop models of wood stoves for the poor people here in Chile that were more efficient, because they were, depleting our forests all over the place. I had studied chemical engineering, and so we devised more efficient wood stoves. And so the installation of these wood stoves in the social areas that were living very hard lives were, as I recall it now, almost complete failure. And it was not about the technology, but it was about the social issues involved in getting somebody with a background, a culture, a family, on using new devices. And so we were engineers, not social entrepreneurs, not psychologists, not sociologists. And so when I came to Oxford, my tutor, my professor said, Rodrigo, I think it's much more interesting than keep on developing technologies. Why don't we explore the fact of diffusing that technology, the technology that you invent in your laboratories? How can you really make a successful installation of those technologies within the poor families? So that's why I very much got involved in the social sector in Oxford. I researched for my thesis maybe on the order of 200 projects throughout the world, of all kinds of social projects, trying to research how successful were this installation, as I say, of these appropriate technologies. And they were not that much, really, in the long term. When the institution was there, when the NGO was there in the plains of Africa or in the jungles of Central America, yes, it did work. But as soon as they left, they went back to their old practices. So there was something very serious, had to do more with, as I say, with social issues rather than engineering issues.
Right. So you essentially took everything you'd learned so far, didn't you, to start trying to put these things together? You have this experience, this research that you've done into trying to find technological solutions for, in that case, deforestation and keeping people warm in the winter. You have all this research showing why the existing models didn't quite work and needing a new solution. You also have your interest in mountaineering, and you see, I think, the potential of mountaineering to change lives as well. So you started to, I guess, put those together. Is that fair to say? And come up with a way to help people.
It's a development. It wasn't, a bright idea, something, a light bulb, just, lighted up in my mind. But it went through years. In my research in Oxford, when we seek out the reasons why some of these technological projects to help the poor were successful, we found concepts like teamwork, like especially leadership. There was somebody who led the whole process. And that might be an engineer, but also an anthropologist, although they were dealing with technology. But they dealt with all of these other issues involving or installing technologies in the poor sectors. And at the same time, in 1989, I was in Oxford from 1987 to 1991 or so, we went to Everest. And again, when I went to Everest, we took the very best climbers in terms of their capacities as rock climbers or ice climbers. But then I realized that to climb one of these great peaks in the Himalayas, you needed, again, teamwork and leadership. So I started joining through these capacities the mountaineering work and the social work. And I came very interested in leadership and teamwork and all these social skills of negotiation, of effective communication within teams, no matter what that team was approaching or what their objective was. Might be a group of doctors and nurses in a hospital, maybe somebody working on a business, or maybe somebody working on a charity. They all had to have these capacities of, teamwork, leadership, all of these social skills.
So this obviously led to your foundation, which basically, as I understand it, you have companies that pay you to take their workers, their executives into the mountains and give them these leadership skills.
Again, it's a story. When we came back from that Mount Everest, and then influenced by, I studied in a school founded by a British man called John Jackson, and it's called the Grange School. We had all the outdoor activities that you can imagine. Of course, rugby and hockey, but also we went out to camping and climbing small peaks. And so outdoor activities in the world of British education is very important. Not here in Chile. So when we came back from Mount Everest, we realized that we needed to develop or help develop these skills, these social skills in our educational sector. And of course, the better way of doing this was, because we knew it, was outdoor activities. So we took examples from Outward Bound, from those kinds of schools, and started. And we did it through a foundation. Here's what you could make called social entrepreneurship. Rather than doing a business of providing outdoor activities for education, we started with a foundation providing educational opportunities in the outdoors for very poor schools, students that wouldn't have, underprivileged schools that, they barely made, the formal classes of maths and science and language. But we provided them with these experiences, maybe 1 or 2 days out in the outdoors. And so we started a foundation with donations from companies, from well-off people and that kind of stuff. Doing that, a company here in Chile approaches and says, why don't you do that same outdoor project to develop teamwork and social abilities and skills in the poor kids with us in the company, that we need that. And so we had the foundation as an organization. We created the company. And nowadays, after 30 years, they're all under one roof. So it's a big house.
Right.
And you have the company and the foundation working very tightly together. Of course, there is laws and regulations that regulate them both. But our instructors, for example, work for both. So one weekend, they will be working with underprivileged kids from a school from the south of Santiago, and the next Wednesday or Thursday, we'll be working with a corporate company. So that's joined together.
Yeah, so it's essentially teaching the same skills, but giving them for free to the people who need them and can't pay for them, basically.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the idea.
That was, again, it's a development. It wasn't an idea that happened overnight. And nowadays, what we do is the foundation, which work with poor kids, have no fixed costs, because all of the fixed costs are covered by the company. So all of the donations, and this is very important because the donor feels that all the money that he's donating goes directly into the program. So there is no overheads to a certain extent within our foundations, because we fund all of the overheads of the company or the foundation.
Is this kind of partnership between, essentially, it's almost like a partnership between a business and a charity, the foundation and the company working together. So is that something that's really scalable and replicable then around the world?
Absolutely. We were recognized by several international organizations because of this work. And this is a model for social entrepreneurship that you need not to be a foundation or a company or for-profit company. You can combine those to do. The more important thing is to service your people, to collaborate with the development of your society. Again, let me talk about Patagonia, because I'm a fan of that company. all of their money goes into environmental projects. And so they combine both, they're helping to develop society at the same time. They call it the health of the business or the health of the organization. We've been now for 32 years, and we now think that we can be for another 30 years, even if we're not there, because we have the basic funds from the foundation to work.
Yeah. And just for the benefit of listeners, you're wearing a Patagonia jumper even as we speak. So you're really living what you're saying at the moment. One thing I'm kind of interested in is that when we talked about your story, we talked about, the work that you've done, and it reminded me of several other stories. So it reminded me of the climber Alex Honnold, who set up his own foundation to help people around the world. I went on a trail running trip to Nepal once, and part of our fees for that went into providing solar panels and solar lights for, some of the very isolated communities we were visiting, things like that. There does seem to be a link between people who go to the outdoors and come back kind of caring about poverty, caring about social issues, caring about protecting the planet and people on it. Is this something that seems true to you? Is that sort of your experience of your peers?
Well, I've seen it a lot. I've seen it a lot, not only with, English-speaking people like Alex Honnold from the United States or people from the UK. We've seen it in France, in Germany, in, Italy. It seems to me that it's something that I reflect upon. When you're a mountain climber, you need to be very much aware of your environment. You need to, you're always checking. It's also in terms like, sailing to a certain extent, that everything might be calm, but you're looking outside and you're looking to the weather and you're looking to the time and looking to the tide. The same thing in mountaineering. You're looking to the slopes, the avalanche, the amount of snow, the amount of sun hitting that slope, and so that might avalanche or 6 days of snow. So you're very much aware of your environment. So your senses are opened to what's happening. And I think all of these big mountaineers, how they go through Nepal and see, the poor people that live in Nepal, or go to Africa, in Morocco, and see, they as their minds are open to their environment, they're not only open, I guess, to the natural environment, but also to the social environment.
Yeah.
And they realize, I have an opportunity to be a climber from Chile or from the United States or from the UK or from France. I have opportunities, especially those of us who had done a good job. And so we had donors that help us in our causes. Why don't we help in some way, And again, that's the mind of a social entrepreneur. How can I use my skills, my capacities, my contacts, my group of people that know me to help a specific community? So I think there is an explanation in that mind, that openness of mind that these climbers might have.
Yeah. And I guess as well, and I think this probably links to that, fear is something that mountaineers obviously have to overcome, or certainly I would if I were to go up any tall cliff. So I imagine that overcoming that maybe helps you then overcome your own fears, your own doubts when you go out and you try to change things. You're trying to do something nearly impossible and affect change on a big scale.
Well, to be very honest, I'm going to say something that might sound hard. It's easier to climb mountains than to approach social challenges. Why is this? When you approach social challenges, it seems like an ideal issue that you want to help, and there's somebody at the other end that is receiving that help. It's not that simple. Within those communities, there is local politics, there is jealousy, there is all those structures of human beings that are not so well received, because we're humans, so somebody wants to be the lead of that community, or somebody has a jealousy of somebody else. And the same happen with donors. Donors, they seek for the help, but they also want some recognition, and so you work with them, but then they say the other, well, but why is all those kinds of things that humans bring into the pool, and things you need to deal with. The mountains are easier to a certain extent. And I'm going to say something very hard here, that mountains are dreadful. They change their environment. They become from a sunny day into a very cold day in just minutes. There is storms. But they've always been like that. They've been that for millions of years. So when you go, you know exactly what you're doing. And so you always carry a little bit of extra food, a little bit of extra clothing, because that might change. In the world of humans, there is a very strong word, which is treason. People that would tell you something, but they do a different thing because, they're literally lying to you. So when I started doing this, I thought, this is great work. It's easy. It's not that easy. It's not that easy. You go into what we call municipalities here, and you talk with the local government that we want to do. And so there's, who are you? Where do you come from? What's your interest in? What you're thinking about? What is that's under the table that I don't see? The trust. And so dealing with humans, to a certain extent, it's much more difficult than dealing with nature.
Mountains are predictable in their unpredictability,
Absolutely.
Basically, and humans not
Absolutely.
so much.
That's a great way of putting it.
That sort of brings me to something that you've developed a bit more recently. You've essentially set up, as I understand it, a sort of organization that allows the third sector, foundations like your own, to kind of coordinate, work together, to be more efficient, to help the money get to the right places, the help get to the right places, and to maybe campaign as a group to get things done. Is that a fair description? As
I was saying, when you work in social issues and you start dealing with humans and politics and all that kind of issues, we realized that in Chile, it's not as in the UK. In our societies, you have three big chunks of power: the state, the private sector, and the social sector, which in the UK, it's very well represented. Here in Chile, it's not that much. You have of course, the state, the government, and the private sector, and they're both, as they have, they're always, reducing taxes and working on their issues. But the social sector is much less represented. And again, within the social sectors, within the foundations, or NGOs in general, there is a kind of competition to a certain extent, because I want funds, and the funds, I need them from the dealings with the government or donations from the private sector. So it took us about 3 or 4 years to start what we call the second floor organization. We gathered about 60 NGOs dealing with inequality, gender issues, poverty, to work together in order to convince the government to produce laws that would, help us in developing our work, in helping our societies. It was very hard work. Happily, it worked. It's now 17 years since we've done that. And there is now 260 of these organizations. And I must say I'm very happy and proud, and because when there is some law that would affect foundations, we're called in. And so I'm not saying that we change the laws, but at least we can put our opinions on the table. So donation laws, and you have a very well-established system in the UK. Here in Chile, it's not well-established. So donations and laws and how to check and relations from the government with the social sector, because the government sometimes have no access to the very basis of a community. So we do. And so all of that has been working. There's still, hundreds of miles to cover in terms of new developments, but it's working nowadays. It's working nowadays. And I've been chairman of those 17 years, maybe 10 or 12.
But it does feel like something that is very much a potential model for other charitable kind of focuses around the world, so all the environmental charities maybe trying to work together more, all of the poverty-alleviating charities trying to work together more. It feels like this is a good model to be using.
Absolutely. I think that dealing with social issues or environmental issues in the world, as we talk about teamwork within these organizations, within a team of climbers, you also need a great collaboration between government, private sector, and the social sector. As an example, we had severe fire last February in Viña del Mar, which is a very important port. And the only way that you could really address the immense amount of necessities that come out because of a fire that, devastates houses and neighborhoods and, of course, in nature, is working together. And this is when politics come in, The government wants to be the ones to help, and the ones to come out in the media saying, we did help. I think that needs to be a little bit put further back. Of course, everybody needs recognition, but working together. Just let me tell you an example. The other day, these organizations, the one I chair, were called by the military. They had what they called a war game, in developing their generals and colonels. And the war game in this case was servicing an emergency, a nature emergency, which is fine. But they didn't know a thing about it. So they called us to work with them and try to explain how communities, cultural history, education develops that. So I think getting into being a sector that is recognized, we're not trying to be recognized in order to, be recognized. And it's trying to work together with the government and with the private sector.
Yeah. It's not trying to get the best tables in restaurants. It's trying to be part of the conversation and make sure that
Absolutely.
Those voices are being heard. So how has your work over the years changed, or has it changed your way of thinking about poverty and the solutions for poverty?
Well, it's
a big question.
In all of what I've done, I try to, because of something I led in Oxford, by the way, my tutor, a man called Dr. Robert Plumtree, who sadly passed away only a few months ago, said, of all of your experiences, what did you learn? So I've been always trying to get out learnings and teachings from all of my experiences. And I think that because of my background, I'm a Catholic, and I was taught by my parents that, poor people need help. And you had the privilege of being well educated and well off, and so you need, and that's not the way we really think of it. It's not that we are high and they are low, to say something, to put it in a way. Poor people, poor communities have incredible capacities, assets, you would say. Maybe they don't have financial assets, but they have organizational assets, knowledge. And so what I've developed is not working this about, solidarity or it's conceiving poverty as an incredible loss of opportunity. There is incredible amounts of talent, of entrepreneurship, of knowledge in these poor communities that because there is not opportunities for them to develop, they can't. But they do have them. Once you go and live with them and share with them, there is incredible things that they are able to do that I think we aren't able to do. And so what we do, again, working with the private sector, is trying to show the private sector not that we need a donation. We need you to understand the fact that these communities have no opportunities, no access. There is lots of barriers for them not to develop. And I think that's been a very important learning for me.
Very much so. So how is the work developing? What is the future for social entrepreneurship as a model?
Again, I think there is sort of three levels for that. One is the actual work on the ground. There is, in Chile, we're a small country, we're not nearly 20 million inhabitants, and in extreme poverty, it's about 500,000. So there's lots of work. And people in poverty, there's probably 1 million or something. So there's lots of work to do at the basic level. That's one thing. The other thing is what I was discussing, how to work together. We work with the private sector. It's not that we take the donation of the private sector and apply it into a specific community. No, we bring in those people that work, the corporates, the executives, the general managers, the CEOs, into that sector. And the government to understand that because of how can I say this? Because they're so big and they're so bureaucratic, it's very hard for them to reach that low level in terms of a neighborhood, in terms of a small community, because they deal with numbers, they deal with, great amount of data. And so what we call capillarity is that you are able to get into the specific conditions of every house within that neighborhood. Government is not able to do that. So they need the social sector. So the second level is not only dealing with the communities, but trying to involve everybody in the society in helping with this. But this, and this is the third level, is very dynamic. So you try and do these things, and you Whatever the result is, might be good, might be not so good, might be even bad, as we had originally on those wood stoves. Take out the learnings and how can we improve. And that table of learnings is not just the outsiders that go into this community, the social sector, the private sector, the government, but also those who are living within that community. So that incredible long learning sessions, we did this. What did it work? Why didn't? What's the gap between what we thought we ought to do, but it didn't happen? Why it didn't happen? And so that's the third level. So there's incredible amount of ground and things to do in the next years.
God, yes. I mean, ultimately, then a lot of it is about, not all of it, but a lot of it is about empowering people on the ground to be able to get exactly what they need. So it's the precision maybe that's been missing.
Absolutely. We had, during the COVID and the pandemic, we had a very political discussion, We thought that poor families who didn't have no work whatsoever, they couldn't get out of their homes, they had their masks and everything, and so they lost every single dime of an income. They have zero income. And so what the government decided with the help of the private sector is to provide them with boxes, with food and basic, clothing and that kind of stuff. And they said, well, you don't do that. What you need to give them is money. It's actually a stipend, because that would move the economy within those communities. We lost that battle, and so we gave them the boxes. What truly happened is that the community took the essentials of that box. The other half of the box, they sold it, because they needed the money. So that's what I mean because of learnings, that you need to develop within the social sector.
Yeah. So what are the challenges you foresee coming? Is climate change a worry? The world economy has been very unstable the last few years. Do you see that continuing and causing more problems?
What also I learned in Oxford is this systemic views.
Mm.
So a couple of years ago, I would have answered something like, well, the environment is a very critical issue. I'm not in it. So I would allow scientists to do that and people work in the environment. I'm more in the social sector. Nowadays, I think they're very much linked. What sectors of our countries, of our populations, of our communities are more badly hit when an environmental disaster comes in? It's the poor. So it's directly joined. Again, as I saw, it happened this last February. This was this big wildfire that started in forest but then moved into the city. It moved into the poor sectors of the city. And so those who suffered the most for this tragic natural disaster were the poor people. So that's very much linked. It's one big issue that you need to address.
So what gives you hope for the future? Do you see levels of relative and absolute poverty dropping? Do you see a pathway to get to that point?
What we have in the media is that everything is not so good, and basically that we are confronting lots of problems and issues. And, think of the United States presidential election, of course, the tremendous troubles in the Ukraine, in Gaza, that's fine. However, because I work in this, I'm very much involved in this entrepreneurial part of our societies, and not only social entrepreneurs, also for business and that kind of stuff. And the amount of people trying to do good things for this society is incredible, absolutely incredible, throughout the world. They don't get the media attention because, media works in some special kind of way, but I am very confident that we're going to go through this incredible process of change. I'm 65 now, so I'm third age to a certain extent. I used a typewriter when I was young, and now I'm using an intelligent phone, an iPhone, or and so much has happened throughout this last 40 years in terms of change that might be scary to a certain extent. I'm on the other side. I'm terribly optimistic that we're going to be able to confront all of our challenges in our societies, environmental challenges, political challenges, poverty challenges, etc.
I think that's a really good note to end on, a note of optimism and hope, frankly, for the future. So these are a couple of questions that we're asking all of our interviewees. First of all, for people who don't know Lincoln, how would you describe it in 3 words?
One is knowledge, lots of knowledge. The other one is inspiring. When I went for dinner at the high table and you had in front of you people working in all kinds of, researches in biology, in engineering, in maths. It's amazing, the incredible. So knowledge, inspiring, and reflection, to be very honest. I think what I learned at Oxford more than anything else is to reflect, more than doing, What do you do? So incredible reflection, deep knowledge, and very powerful inspiration.
That's a lovely way to put it. So we're talking about the future today, obviously, and in this series as a whole. So we're also asking people, what advice you have for the students who are either at Lincoln now or who are going to come to Lincoln in the future, because they're going to be the stewards of the future of the planet. So what would your words of wisdom for them be?
I would say, when I went out of Lincoln, I was so proud of myself, and we've done this. I'm a doctor from this incredible university. I can conquer the world to a certain extent, to put it, metaphorically. I think you need a component of humbleness. Of course, a lot. That's fine. But again, when we discuss about this open-mindedness to the environment, to the social sector, you can contribute to the development of our societies with an incredible amount of knowledge and capacities and skills that you've learned throughout your lives, and especially at Lincoln and Oxford. But at the same time, be open to learn from that environment, from the social skills. So from those, in my case, from those poor communities that they have their own knowledge, from the scientists, you might be an economist and the scientists have a different view on environmental crisis. You can contribute, that's fine, but it's not that they need to follow what you're going to do. Okay, I can contribute, but at the same time, I'm humble and I'm open to hear, to see what's going on. Even within a company, you probably become a CEO of a company. Okay, that's fine, but those companies have all kinds of shareholders. Of course, the shareholders, but the stakeholders, the clients, the government. So be very open to try to understand the surroundings, the environment to whatever you're trying to do.
Keep learning, basically.
Basically.
Very wise words. So, Rodrigo Jordan, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure and an honor.
The Future Unleashed is made possible through the generosity of Dr. Sarah Althari, who developed this series with Lincoln College. It's hosted by me, Helen O'Hara, and produced by Rachel Buchanan. The music, Avrio, is courtesy of Unsog Lee, and graphics are by Gemma Proctor at One Limited.